Before I tell you how I fell in love with my blind friend, take a breath with me. This is a gentle, true story about sound, touch, patience, and courage in a bustling American city, where friendship learned to listen deeper, and love finally learned to speak from both sides. If this story resonates, please like, subscribe, and comment. Your support helps us share compassionate narratives with more listeners today. My name is Evan Hayes, and if we were sitting together in a quiet clinic waiting room or on a park bench beside a city street with traffic humming like a low-ocean tide, I would offer you tea, tell you to settle your shoulders, and begin with the day I met Caleb on Clark Street in Chicago. It was late afternoon in early spring, the kind of day that turns the lake a dull silver and makes the trees shake tight green buds like polite hands hesitating at a doorway. I was 37, worn around the edges from long shifts at the hospital, the kind where the elevator seems to sigh when you step into it, as if it knows the weight you're carrying and wants to share it. The bus doors rattled open with a tired grumble, and there he was, poised at the curb with a white cane that flicked lightly at his toe like a heartbeat. Tap, tap, pause, tap. The crosswalk chirped, a robotic bird telling us to walk, and people surged forward like they always do. He didn't move at first. He lifted his head, listening. He looked right through the noise, and for a moment the whole street seemed to soften. I said, "Would you like an elbow?" Clear and gentle, the way the occupational therapist at the hospital taught me. He tilted his chin toward my voice, and I heard the smile before I saw it. "I'm good, thank you," he said. "But if you could tell me when the light starts counting down, that would be kind." So I did. The numbers blinked from 25 to 2s and 1s, and when it felt comfortable, I walked slightly ahead and to the side, my arm relaxed, my words simple and calm. "There's a seam in the pavement in about 3 steps," I said, "and it's one of those tricky ones." He smiled as the cane found it first, and we moved like two people who had already practiced together without ever having met. When we reached the other side, he laughed, soft and low. "This city thinks seams keep us from tripping," he said, "but sometimes they are the thing you trip over." I laughed too. "I'm Evan," I said, offering my hand without reaching for his. He turned toward me and lifted his, open and steady. His handshake was warm, deliberate, just the right amount of pressure. "Caleb," he said. His voice had the easy warmth of late-night radio, the tone that makes you want to lean back and listen. I pointed to the coffee shop, a small place that still kept plants in the window and a chalkboard that left dusty logic on the sidewalk. "Would you like a coffee?" "On me." "For the seam." He lifted his face and listened for a beat, and I could tell he was mapping the space in his mind the same way I check my own pulse after a long call night. "I have 10 minutes, he said, "before I catch a ride to the station. I won't say no to coffee." We went in together, letting the bell give its little tin announcement. The air smelled like cinnamon and espresso, and the counter was crowded with pastries that always look better than they taste. The barista was young and loud in the way that says they are trying, and I was grateful for that. I asked Caleb if he wanted me to read the board, and he nodded. "Yes, thank you." "Slow if you can." I learned in that small moment that speed is often a kind of carelessness. I read from top to bottom, not skipping the silly seasonal names. He ordered a black coffee, and I asked for mine with oat milk, and we sat at a small table by the wall. He folded his cane neatly and set it beside his leg where he could find it without looking. I know that is an obvious sentence, but it mattered to me. There was order in his movements, the kind of mindful grace that comes from doing something with intention 1,000 times. We talked like normal people do, which is rarer than it sounds. He told me he grew up in Michigan, moved to the city for school, and stayed for the music and the trains. He explained that he lost much of his sight during his teens, slowly, like fog thickening until it becomes a wall. "I'm not completely in the dark," he said. "But it's not the kind of light that shows shape the way people want it to. It's more like sound with a little glow dusted on top." I told him I worked as a respiratory therapist at Northwestern Memorial, that I loved listening to lungs, that I could tell when someone was scared just by the way air moved through a sentence. He laughed and said, "Then you can hear me smiling." It was easy talking to him. It felt like those rare mornings when the city gives you an untroubled commute and the sun warms your face through the window just right. After 10 minutes, that felt like 4. His phone gave a small chime that sounded like a wooden spoon on a bowl. "My ride," he said, reaching for his cane. "I'm headed to the station for the late show." I asked if he meant the theater, but he shook his head. "No, the station," he said, as in radio. "I host a community show at night, stories and songs. Hardly anyone listens except truckers and early shift folks, but they write in sometimes and tell me they heard me when nothing else did." I told him that sounded like medicine for the air. He said I could come by sometime if I liked, bring coffee and a steady voice. Then he stood, offered his hand again, and left me with that smile still in the room after the door shut, like an echo made of warmth. I started listening that week. He was live from 9 to midnight on a station that barely crept a few miles beyond the river. But at the hospital, tucked into a spare charting room, I could get the stream on my phone. His show started with a piano riff and the soft thud of a drum, the kind of beat that was human, not machine. He read small essays people sent him. He told a story about a widower who planted tomatoes in paint buckets on a fire escape. He played old Nina Simone and a contemporary singer who sounded like a prayer whispered into a kitchen towel. He would describe the weather like he was describing an old friend who had just come home. "We have a bright cold tonight, with the kind of wind that shakes the flags along Lakeshore Drive into crisp attention." It felt like a hand resting on your shoulder in that good way when you are doing something hard and someone says, "You are here and I see you." In time, I called in once. I didn't say my name. I just told a short story about a patient who asked to hear rain, so I opened the window even though it was a rule not to. The rain sounded like pennies in a jar. He listened, paused, and then said, "Sometimes good rules need a soft bend to let in life." He added a song after, and I stayed with it, breathing in time with the snare. We kept meeting by accident at first. I would see him at the farmer's market by the park, his cane gently tapping crates of apples as though greeting them by name. He wore shirts with clean lines and sleeves rolled to the elbow, and he carried a small backpack with a water bottle in the side pocket. Once I spotted him on the platform for the Red Line, standing straight and still as people jostled. He held his chin high, listening for the train's wind and the speaker's tired voice. "Doors open on the left," the screen said. When the train pulled in, I stepped closer, keeping a respectful distance, and said, "Northbound, first car is less crowded today." He turned slightly toward me and smiled. "Evan," he said, and it was a small joy to hear my name in his mouth. "You can tell?" I asked. He tapped his temple lightly. "Your cadence," he said, "and the way your jacket sounds when you shift. You carry pens in the left pocket." "I do." It felt both impossible and completely normal, like most of the city's miracles that hide inside routine. We rode together, speaking in those quiet tones that feel safe on trains. He told me he liked to count the stops in his head, a small ritual that gave shape to the ride. I told him that when I am anxious, I count my breaths. 4 in, I said, 6 out. It helps. He said, "That's a good ratio. You should teach that on the radio." Neither of us said the thing that had started to bloom between us. Those first weeks were arranged like a careful table. Everything in its place, not because we were rigid people, but because we were being gentle with something that might break if we grabbed it too fast. I learned how to be a good-sighted guide the way you learn to knead bread. By feeling the give and getting it wrong in smaller and smaller ways until one day it's right. I learned not to talk about see like it was a crime word. He sees, only not the way I do. I learned to ask, not assume. "Do you want my elbow, or would you rather I walk a half step ahead and narrate?" He would tell me, and we shifted without apology. I learned to say, "The curb is up," instead of grabbing. I learned that the city had its own braille, the hum of traffic on the distant expressway, the whisper of leaves 2 blocks away when the wind comes off the lake, the metallic clang of a bike rack when someone is late and angry. He taught me to slow down my descriptions until they were honest. "You don't have to make it pretty," he said once as we turned onto a block with torn-up pavement and orange barrels. "Just tell me what's true and let me make it beautiful if I want to." So I did. The barista is preoccupied. The floor is sticky in a stripe near the door. The sky is gray and heavy but trying. He liked that. We went for walks along the lakefront at sunset. He would ask me to tell him about the horizon, and I would say it was a coin, half silver, half copper, turned on its edge in someone's practiced fingers. He would laugh and say, "You just made that up." I would admit it, and he would say, "It's still true." One November night, after he finished his radio show, we sat in the tiny station kitchen, the kind with an old electric kettle and a spoon that had seen better days. There was a humming from the freezer and the low muffled music of whoever was on air in the other room. Caleb leaned on the counter holding a mug in both hands and told me the story of the day he decided to get a cane. He had resisted it at first, he said, because he thought it would brand him with a shout he hadn't chosen. "People look at you and see the cane before they see you," he said, tapping it lightly against the cabinet. "And they forget to ask your name." He had stumbled hard one day on a broken sidewalk, knee bloodied, pride bleeding too, and an old man had stopped. The man didn't speak right away. He stood like a post in a storm until the wind passed, and then he said, "You can carry pain or you can carry a tool. One is lighter." Caleb went to get a cane the next day. "I thought I was choosing visibility," he said, "but really I was choosing independence." I listened, because that is my favorite thing to do when someone gives you their real story. I wanted to reach out and touch his shoulder. I wanted to say, "I carry tools for a living and still forget to use them on myself." Instead, I ran my finger along the rim of my cup and asked him what kind of tea he preferred. He said peppermint, because it felt like a clean hallway after you mop, and he liked beginnings that welcomed you. There were other things I learned. He had a small file of Braille labels in a desk drawer that he used for jars and spice tins. He had a screen reader on his phone that spoke in a voice he had set to a low, steady speed, a voice that sounded like patience. He had music everywhere, on the living room floor by the baseboard, an old vinyl stack like a library of clouds. In a drawer, harmonicas wrapped like sandwiches, and by the sofa, a small keyboard with a chipped C. I learned that he loved baseball because of the radio, not the screen. He had grown up listening to games in the summer, counting the rhythm of the commentator, hearing the crowd like wind lifting when a long ball went deep. So I took him to Wrigley when the season opened. We sat high. It was cold and righteous. I packed a thermos of hot chocolate and a blanket that had seen better days but still did the job. I told him what was happening like I was reading a story, not too fast, not too full, leaving room for his own imagination. When a batter hit a line drive to left, the crowd groaned and then cheered with gratitude for trying, and I knew then what I had been nibbling around for weeks. I was falling in love with my friend. It arrived the way a river arrives at a bend, completely natural and slightly startling when you look at it from above. I kept my words inside my chest for a while, the way you keep a letter you are not ready to post. There was a night in January when the city went dark on our block. The wind had played games with the wires, and the building lost its patience. My phone buzzed with a grid alert, and I pulled on my coat and walked the short distance to Caleb's apartment. The stairs creaked in that old Chicago way, wood telling you stories about weight and time. He met me at the door with a small candle glowing on the kitchen table behind him. The apartment smelled faintly of oranges and a little like winter boots. "You okay?" I asked, and he grinned. "I am," he said. "But if you came here to cook me the end of the world in a cast-iron skillet, I wouldn't stop you." We ate grilled cheese and tomato soup with steam fogging our faces. We sat at his small table and listened to the building mutter and pop like an old man settling back into a chair. Without electricity, the apartment was honest. The windows talked to the wind, the candles sighed, and the pipes whispered their own ideas. We talked about fear. He told me, "People think darkness means I'm used to fear. But the truth is, I'm used to learning how to walk in whatever room I'm in." I told him that sometimes fear is just the body asking for more information. He tilted his head. "Like a patient," he said, "who needs the diagnosis explained again, but this time with your hand on the page." We were quiet after that, in the good way. Snow started to fall against the window like rice at a wedding, and for a moment sitting there with him, I thought, it would be all right if the lights never came back. Then the power clicked and hummed, and radios returned to their low murmur, and the refrigerator sighed like a worker seeing a bus turn the corner. The world remembered all its electricity, but I remembered the quiet. If love had a voice, it was in that small kitchen. I would be lying if I said there weren't awkward pieces. I remember the brunch where a well-meaning stranger put her hands on his shoulders and steered him toward a table across from us, as if he were a dolly and she were a delivery person. I stood up quickly, too fast, ready to be loud in a way that my profession asks me not to be. Caleb squeezed my arm. His grip was firm. "I've got this," he said, and he turned toward the woman with a voice as smooth as a well-made apology. "Excuse me," he said. "I've already chosen my seat. If I'd like help, I'll ask for it." "Thank you." She blushed, and her apology was clumsy but real. After she left, I exhaled like I had been holding my breath under the deep end. He tapped the table near my hand. "You can back me up," he said, "but let me handle the first move." I nodded and said, "You're right. It is a strange thing about love. It asks you to be brave, and sometimes the bravest thing is to make space." We had our first argument on a damp day in April. It wasn't about anything we could put in a box. It was about pace and pride and the way small things collect in a corner until they are a pile. I had been reading a menu out loud in a crowded diner. The room was a little chaotic, the noise echoing off the tiles, my voice a bit too earnest, my sentences too guided. He interrupted gently but clearly. "Evan," he said, "I know how to order eggs." He laughed a little, but it was the kind of laugh that is only partly a laugh. I felt my face heat and my stomach flash that bright, embarrassed color. I apologized quickly, too fast, like tossing water from a glass. "I was trying to help," I said. He leaned in, quiet. "I know," he said, "and half the time it is lovely. The other half it makes me feel small. It's hard because you are kind, and kindness can be a heavy thing to push away." We both took slow breaths because that is what keeps a room from fogging. Then we did what grown people in love, or almost in love, must do. We named it out loud. "I need to learn the difference between support and steering," I said. He nodded. "And I need to tell you sooner when I feel it going wrong," he said. We laughed then, real laughter, because we were two imperfect men trying. It still stung in the good way that means you are alive. I remember the day he met my sister, which felt like introducing someone to a part of me I keep in a careful drawer. She lives in Indianapolis with her wife and their small dog who behaves as though he is an entire marching band. They came up on a Saturday in May when the magnolias were showing off on Michigan Avenue, and the lake wind was in love with nobody. We went to the Art Institute because some classics deserve another look even if you can't see them the way I do. The museum has programs designed for visitors who are blind or low vision, and we joined a touch tour for a sculpture gallery. There was a guide who knew what she was doing. She placed our hands gently on the edges of forms and described the art, not with adjectives piled up like pancakes, but with careful nouns and verbs that could hold weight. Caleb's fingers moved over the marble like they were learning a dialect. He asked questions that made the guide glow, and my sister watched him with the kind of warmth she reserves for people she trusts. Later at lunch, my sister leaned over to me and said in a voice that was both a whisper and a promise, "I like him. He listens when he answers." I realized that was exactly what I had fallen for. He listened when he answered, and love is mostly that. There is a part of the story that still makes my chest tighten. It was a morning in June when Caleb called me to say that his guide dog application had been accepted, and he would be matched later that summer. He had used a cane for years with confidence. He wasn't seeking a fix, and he made that clear. He wanted a partner for certain kinds of travel, someone with a nose for danger and an honest joy for sidewalks. I was thrilled for him. He went to training in New York, and when he returned to Chicago, I met Atlas, a golden lab with a coat the color of toast and eyes that seemed to hold ancient secrets and straightforward truths at once. The first time I saw them step off a curb together was like watching a two-part symphony find the exact moment to join. Atlas watched the world with seriousness and a wag that was all heart. Caleb's posture changed with the harness, a new alignment that read like a sentence written with a fountain pen instead of a ballpoint. Atlas was working when the harness was on, and we birthed our affection accordingly, learning to greet like old friends when the harness came off and to let him be a professional on duty. The city changed a little then for all of us. The sidewalks seemed wider, the corners clearer, the intersections a little less impatient. People still made mistakes, but there is something about a dog with a job that softens the edges of the world. I haven't told you the moment I said the words yet. I wasn't withholding to create drama. I was respecting the small courage it took to say them, and sometimes a story needs walking before it can carry heavy things. It was late July, and the air was sweet and thick. We had gone to a minor league game outside the city because a friend had seats and the promise of fireworks. We sat on metal bleachers that made your jeans hum when people trudged past. Atlas lay at our feet under the bench, patient, as if he was part of the stadium itself. I described the game loosely, and then stopped describing because we were simply sitting together the way one sits when language doesn't have to earn its keep. After the last out, the lights dimmed, and the field became a sky. Fireworks began. I realized how sight-centered the world makes that experience, and I flinched at my impulse to narrate color. Caleb saved me from my own habits with a small sigh of delight that sounded like recognition. "Describe the sound," he said. "Not the color, the sound." So I did. I told him about the crack thump that blooms like a chest opening. I told him about the fizzing whispers that linger like soda poured into a warm glass. I told him about the long pierce that hangs and trembles before it falls, making the birds in the trees lose their balance for a second. I told him about the echo, the way the shells talk to the sky and the air says, "Yes, I heard you," and sends the reply back in a softer voice. He listened with his face tilted up like a sunflower, and when the last ash drifted down, he turned toward me. "You teach me the way a good doctor explains a diagnosis," he said. "You don't hurry the hard parts." I laughed and swallowed at the same time. It was not the most graceful thing I've ever done. I reached for words that had been waiting for me like patient birds on a telephone wire. "I'm in love with you," I said. Simple, not decorated, true. He was quiet. Atlas adjusted his paws under the bench and let out a sigh that deserved a treat. The stadium was still, people gathering their bags and their chatter with the slow shuffle that follows wonder. Caleb breathed in and then out. He set his hand on my knee with care, like he was placing a hand on a page. "I'm in love with you too," he said. "I've tried not to be." I wanted to be sure I wasn't confusing gratitude with love, and that takes time in a world that loves to hurry. I put my forehead to his temple, a small lean that felt like a prayer. And the night revealed itself as exactly itself, nothing more, nothing less. We did not kiss there because sometimes restraint is the highest tenderness. We walked slowly to the car, Atlas proud and quiet, and we let the silence between us be a soft hallway to a new room where we would live. The beginning of our love did not crack the sky open. It changed the furniture. We moved things around gently so both of us could find them in the dark. We made lists, not because love needs paperwork, but because love appreciates clarity. We made a plan for the diner menu situation. We agreed on signals for "I've got it" and "I could use a little help." We promised to ask before we stepped in. He taught me how to use the right words when strangers asked the wrong questions. I taught him how to navigate my own rough edges when work drained me and I spoke softer than I meant to. We had a silly argument about whether to label the spice jars with Braille and print or just Braille. Briefly, we were the world's least interesting radicals. We compromised by labeling everything with both. In those first months, our love had the tender feel of a well-made quilt that is new to the bed. The seams held, and we believed they always would. We told his parents in August. In their small house outside Kalamazoo, where the gravel driveway sings when a car rolls in and the kitchen has magnets from every national park, even the ones they have only visited in their dreams. His mother tears up easily in the good way that waters the garden. His father is quiet until he is not. And then he tells a story that sits you down and feeds you until you understand something you didn't. We sat at the kitchen table with iced tea, sweating into napkins and a bowl of cherries that demanded you commit to them or choose a safer fruit. Caleb said, "Evan and I are together," and waited. His mother took a breath and let it out like relief. She stood and hugged us both, her arms smelling like onions and basil. His father nodded, looked at his son, and said, "Do you feel safe?" Caleb said yes. His father looked at me and said, "Do you listen when he tells you how to walk through the world?" I said yes. He nodded again. Then he told a story about the time Caleb was 12 and decided he wanted to build a treehouse, even though his eyes had already started dimming in that sneaky way they did. He built it anyway with help from a neighbor and a book of plans, and the neighbor stood at the bottom reading each step in a way that made precision into a love language. He was up there at dusk, his father said, and you know how dusk is, generous to some and stingy to others. He hammered by sound. He trusted his own hands. He looked at us both and said, "Trust your hands." I think about that every time we face something that looks bigger than we are. We told my mother in September over the phone, because she can take news that way without needing to see my face. She listens to my words like she's checking a heartbeat. She asked me if I was happy, and I told her the truth, I was. She told me I sounded like myself for the first time in a long time, which is the kind of sentence a mother says that makes you sit down on the kitchen floor for a minute and let your whole life wash over your shoes. She asked me what Caleb was like, and I said, "He listens when he answers." She laughed, and in her laugh I heard the echo of my sister's. "Then you better keep him," she said, "and be sure you keep yourself right alongside." Being a couple changed how we walked through public space in ways you would expect and ways you might not. We held hands. He would sometimes guide my hand to the top of Atlas's head to feel the soft fur when he was off duty, which both of us pretended was for the dog but was also for me, to remind me of the kindness that animals bring into the room without preamble. We answered questions together. We gently corrected people together. We learned who among our friends rose to our love with curiosity and joy, and who watched from across the room with a worry that didn't belong to us. We learned quickly that love makes a good map if you let it. There was a day at the farmer's market when we wandered slowly through stalls like a pair practicing a dance. One vendor, an older man with a face like a baked apple and a voice like a car that starts on the first try every time, asked Caleb if he wanted to smell the peaches. He wasn't precious about it. He put the fruit in Caleb's hand without fanfare and let him find the place where the scent was strongest. "That one," Caleb said after holding a peach up to his mouth and nose rather than his eyes. "That one is an August song. We bought too many because we could. We made a peach cobbler in my kitchen with the fire escape door open to let the sugar air out so the apartment didn't stick to it forever. We ate the cobbler with spoons that were a little too large and felt like children doing something they shouldn't, but would not be stopped. We laughed until we had to hold our sides and sit on the floor, our backs against the cabinets, Atlas sprawling like a golden rug beside us, and I thought, I wish everyone could feel this. Not the peaches. The part where you count the breaths of someone you love and know they are not alone in the room. The autumn came and settled around us like a blanket. We went to the park with low light like honey, and a jazz trio played near the fountain with guitar and upright bass and a trumpet that never tried to show off. We found a rhythm we could live inside without checking if it was the one people approved of. We learned to be quiet together in ways that were never empty. He taught me to appreciate the sound of a page turning on a book he ran his fingers over, the soft punctuation of fingertips meeting words. I taught him to love a certain cafe at the corner of Clark and Diversey, where the baristas stopped asking and simply put sugar on the table in a small dish with a spoon that had belonged to someone's grandmother. He taught me how to make a playlist that could carry you through a day without asking too much of any single song. I taught him where the city hides quiet. The back steps of the Field Museum on a weekday morning, the empty bleachers at a high school field at dusk, the little patch of garden behind the church where the tomatoes grow in a square and people whisper without being asked. We had a scary night once when he tripped on a cracked path while Atlas was off duty and banged his shin so hard the whole world stopped. He cursed, which is to say he was human, and I knelt beside him in that steady way the hospital taught me. He took my hand and said he was fine, but then his face went pale and he didn't look fine. I told him the plan like a med student presenting on rounds. "We're going to sit here for a moment," I said. "Then we're going to get ice. We're going to elevate. We're going to monitor. And if anything is not what we expect, we'll go, step by step." He nodded, took long, slow breaths, and in a minute the tightness in his forehead eased. I have seen many strong people be tender with their own bodies in emergencies, and I knew we would be all right. Later that night, when the bruise rose like a storm on his skin and we made jokes about maps and weather reports, he said, I can trust you in a scary room. That is one of the most intimate things anyone has ever said to me. We do not talk enough about how love is made of small moments where someone promises to sit with you in the room where fear lives. There was a Christmas where we decided to cut our own tree and couldn't stop laughing because neither of us was particularly good at it. The farm was outside the city, and the ground was a bright crunch underfoot. We had a saw that looked better in the photo than it performed on the pine, and we were a pair of grown men who should have known to ask for help and did not. We took turns. Atlas watched us with an expression that said, "I would fix this if I had thumbs." We got it down eventually, tied it to the car like we knew what we were doing, and drove home singing a half-remembered carol. In our living room, we decorated it without trying to make it perfect. Some ornaments hung low because that is where our hands rested. I learned to describe ornaments not like label text, but like memory. "This one is glass with a small snowman inside," I said. "He looks surprised to be here." Caleb laughed and said, "Me too, but in the best way." We made hot chocolate with extra marshmallows because we were adults and could, and we sat on the couch while the tree told the story it was always going to tell, light being kind to whatever it touches. I could list every small thing and keep you here past midnight. The way he stands at a window with his hands in his pockets when the rain hits sideways. The way he knows when someone has stepped into a conversation that doesn't belong to them and can gently usher them out with a question like a doorman who loves his building. The way his voice lowers when he says my name in the morning on the phone before he has put on his day. The way he apologizes without a flourish when he gets it wrong and expects the same from me. The way we learn to say, "Can we try that again?" and actually do it. The way distance is a word we use for maps and not for each other. The way we tell the truth, even when the truth looks like a badly wrapped present we're afraid to open. The way he asks me, "What color is the day?" and I tell him not so much because he needs to know, but because it makes me notice. The way I ask him, "What shape is the sound of our life today?" and he says things like tender or sturdy or warm like the back of a radio. When my father died in late March, the hospice nurse called me at dawn. It was a gentle call, but no such calls are easy. I drove to Indianapolis in the gray that feels like absence. Caleb met me there in a borrowed car with Atlas in the back seat, quiet as a prayer book. At the house, everything smelled like cedar and coffee. The living room had the messy reverence of grief, the tissues, the casseroles, the silence that forgets to whisper. Caleb did not try to fix anything. He sat beside me on the low couch and put his hand on my knee the way you place a hand on a page. He did not talk about silver linings or the way time heals. He did not reach for a lesson. He sat, and that is the better medicine. When I stood at the small podium at the funeral and spoke about my father's hands that delivered mail in snowstorms and summer storms and the kind that happen inside a person, I trembled. I looked out at my family and saw what you see at funerals, the faces of everyone you have ever been to them. When my voice caught, I heard Caleb inhale and then exhale in that slow, steady rhythm we practiced together, and I matched him without looking. I got through the words. Later, in the quiet of my childhood bedroom, with the posters still on the closet door like fossils of a young man who thought everything was linear, I cried. Caleb did not turn on the lamp. He sat in the dim and we counted breaths. It was enough. It was everything. I promised you at the beginning that this was a story about patience and courage and the way we learn to listen. I am still learning. There are days I get in my own way. There are days he is tired and would rather not be a teacher for anyone, even me. There are mornings when the coffee is too weak and the city is too loud and the elevator smells like stale aftershave mixed with worry. On those days, we remember to ask questions in the right order. "Do you need me to fix this?" I say, "or do you need me to hear it?" He answers. Or I answer when he asks me back. Sometimes we go for a walk without talking. Sometimes we lie on our backs on the floor and play a record and see who can guess the time by the sound of the afternoon. Sometimes we let Atlas choose the route, which leads to dogs and smells and a better mood than we deserved. Sometimes we talk like a pair of radio hosts that nobody invited, making up callers and playing tracks we think might save someone who needs to be saved by something gentle today. If you are listening to this and you want instructions, I don't have a list that will work for everyone. I have what we hold. Ask, don't assume. Describe, Don't decorate unless decoration is invited. Touch with consent. Laugh together. Make room for frustration so it does not have to kick the door. Learn the tools your partner uses and never treat them like a tragedy. Let them lead you through their world because it is not missing anything. It has its own abundance. Accept help without shame. Offer help without pride. Tell the truth kindly. Be willing to learn 100 times. Trust your hands. Trust each other in the scary rooms. Build the treehouse even if someone said dusk is unforgiving. That, too, is love. Years have passed now, somehow, not with the drama of a calendar page ripped dramatically by a movie editor, but as a steady accumulation of days. We still live in the same building where the stairs tell stories. We took a bigger apartment not because we needed the space, but because the light on the third floor makes the walls soft. Atlas is grayer around the muzzle and somehow more distinguished than a senator. Caleb still hosts the late-night radio show twice a week. And now sometimes he does a segment called Listen to the City, where he records normal sound. A man laughing through a sneeze, the bell on a bicycle at dawn, the low rumble of a bus that seems to apologize with its brakes at every stop sign. His listeners send in their own sound postcards, and the station made a map, and I am not ashamed to tell you I cried when I saw the pins. They looked like stars you could put your finger on without burning. On a recent evening, at the kitchen table that has held so many bowls and elbows and apologies and jokes, I asked Caleb what being in love feels like to him today. He smiled in thought. Then he said, "It feels like a good radio, the kind you tune by ear, when you know you are near the right station because the static softens and the voice comes clear. It still needs your attention. You don't just set it and forget it, but it rewards the attention with a hand you can hold." I told him it feels like a steady chest under my palm, like counting breaths because I can, and not because I'm worried they will stop. It feels like a house where the furniture knows it can be moved when life asks for a different room, and the picture frames do not mind being held at a new angle. We went to a friend's wedding last month in a garden behind a library where the vines have opinions and the chairs wobble on the grass a little. The officiant spoke kindly and briefly, which is a public service. Afterward, there was a small dance floor under string lights. People swayed. Kids ran past with fistfuls of cake. The night smelled like cut stems and sugar. I took Caleb's hand. He placed his palm on my shoulder and his other hand in mine, and I placed my hand at his waist, and we moved. We are not dancers. We are people who like to sway when our knees allow it. He laughed at one point because I stepped on his foot as though it were my job, and he whispered into my ear, "We can practice." I whispered back, "We will," and we kept on. The song ended. Another began. We remained. Atlas slept under a table nearby, off-duty and dreaming with his paws running. And we were, in that moment, exactly what we had become. Two men who found each other at a crosswalk, who learned to say what we meant, who chose to make room for each other's ways of knowing the world, who practiced love like it was a craft worth learning forever. When we got home, the apartment had the quiet that follows celebration, a gentle afterglow that makes you want to whisper even if no one is sleeping. We put the flowers in a jar on the counter. I turned on the small lamp that makes a golden circle on the table. He touched the edge of a petal and said, "It feels like a promise." I said, "It is." We stood there for a while, and then I asked soft, "Tell me something you can see right now." He smiled, because we say that to each other sometimes, and he reached out to touch my cheek. "You're smiling," he said. I closed my eyes for a second, the way people do when gratitude is heavy and kind. I opened them to the room we have made together. A space where descriptions are not charity and compassion is not a performance. A room where we are both whole and both allowed to ask for help. A room where love is not a surprise at the end of a story, but the language the story is told in. So if you are here with me at this late point in the telling, know this. I fell in love with my blind friend not because I wanted to save him or because he wanted to save me. We fell in love because we listened until the truth sounded clear on the dial. We learned to say yes and no and not yet. We learned the courage it takes to ask for a steady elbow and the equal courage it takes to step back and let someone walk their own path beside you. We learned that the world is not made of what is missing. It is made of what we bring to it together.